Hey, this is Chris Walker with evangelismcoach.org, and I want to share with you some quick thoughts that I had today with regards to the work and purpose of an evangelism committee in a local church. One of the questions that I get often in my role as a church consultant is, what really does an evangelism committee do? A lot of mainline churches in particular have an evangelism committee, and they tend to spin their wheels. They're not quite sure what to do. They're not quite sure what to make. They're not quite sure how to act, how to organize, or how to proceed. And so I field these questions. And so let me give you a couple of different areas for evangelism committees in terms of thinking through some of the areas of work that they might be able to do. And so let me break this down into three areas of focus. The first area of focus that I think evangelism committees can do is to actually focus on growing in their own personal skill in sharing their faith. And so the purpose of the evangelism committee is to be actively involved in personal faith sharing. And so they're studying material, they're actually engaging people in conversation. They come back together, and after that they come back together on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and they hold each other accountable to those conversations, and they hold each other accountable to having them, to learning from them, to praying for the opportunities to have conversations, and then they also debrief those evangelistic conversations. Let me give you an example. One particular meeting might be where the evangelism committee will come together and that they'll brainstorm the list of friends that they want to be praying for. And then they will hold each other accountable for the next week or two to be praying every day for the names of the people on that list. And in praying for those people, they'd be looking for the opportunities to have those conversational moments. They'd be looking for those opportunities to have conversations about spiritual thirst. They'd be looking for those moments where the spiritual thirst might be expressed. And then the committee would come together 2 weeks later and report as to how did you do in praying, how did you do in looking for those conversations, did you actually have conversations? And so the role of the committee then is really focused on growing in your own personal evangelism efforts. And so that's one area of focus that an evangelism committee can do. Now, for the debriefing part of that, here's some questions that I like to kick around every time we have a spiritual conversation. During that committee meeting, you might be able to share the conversation that you had, share and then ask each other, where was the spiritual thirst? Where did you see the Holy Spirit at work? If you could do this conversation over again, what is a direction that you would go? If you could do that over, would you say it this way? Would you say it a different way? And begin to look and learn and debrief from those conversations so that you can grow more comfortable in being able to share your faith. You may have the opportunity where you can present the gospel and call people into a relationship with Jesus, and perhaps you messed up, and debriefing a conversation would be able to help you learn from that. Or maybe you only have the opportunity to invite a person to church. Or maybe you might only have the opportunity where your person expressed a spiritual thirst to you, but you missed it. And that may be a place in those debriefing conversations to be able to hold each other accountable for that. So that's one area of focus for an evangelism committee. A second area of focus for an evangelism committee can very well be helping people in your congregation by giving them training, resources, and opportunities. This is enabling the members of your congregation, one by one, grow in their skill as well in being able to share their faith. And so the work of the evangelism committee in a situation like this would be to be involved in looking for curriculum, looking for programming, looking for opportunities to provide that kind of evangelism training. Whether that's buying content or buying training resources and organizing study groups and stuff like that. The administration that is involved in looking at evangelism training as a program. Now, one of the greatest books that I think is currently on the market with regards to evangelism training happens to be Jeffrey Johnson's God's Style. And an evangelism committee should read that book, and that takes a look at different personality styles, but the genius of that book is to take the current programming and trainings that are out on the market and match that up to your church's personality. And so that's Jeffrey Johnson's God's Style. And that could be a book that you might want to study as an evangelism committee. As a committee, you also might want to purchase some of my stuff on personal evangelism. I've got a course on my website. It's called Fear-Free Evangelism, and that's really focused on looking at those conversational opportunities in cooperation with the Holy Spirit. And so that is what an evangelism committee can do. It can be looking for personal evangelism resources. It can be looking for organizing the training opportunities to help your members grow more comfortable in sharing their faith. A third level is to look more at the congregational level and really trying to help the congregation be effective in its community. It's taking a look at helping the congregation look at its currently active programming and how can that be evangelistic by nature. For example, I was consulting with a church not too long ago, and they had a routine program of community service that they did. They would go out into the community service, they would go out and they would do this community service on a regular basis, and it had become such a routine, feel-good event that there wasn't a whole lot of faith sharing that was going on. And so my challenge to them as a congregation was to, how can you look at the conversational opportunities that naturally present themselves while you are doing your good works, while you are doing your community events, while you are, an example would be, how can you set up a prayer booth at a community event? And I've got some information on my website at evangelismcoach.org about how to set up a prayer booth. But the work of the Evangelism Committee, or the area of focus, is to help train the congregation to think about its outreach events so that they can have an evangelistic impact as well. So those are the three areas of focus that I've been thinking about for evangelism committees. And let me just pull that back together. Number one is work at growing your own personal evangelism skills and holding each other accountable to that. Second one is providing the training materials and resources and events to help your members grow comfortable in personal evangelism. And then the third area of focus is helping to raise the evangelistic temperature through providing that training in community events that you are already doing. This has been Chris Walker with evangelismcoach.org, and I invite you to visit the website and see all sorts of articles. Right now, there are up to over 700 articles on personal evangelism, congregational evangelism.